Holy crap, Marvel is finally giving us good content. With Loki Season 2, Episode 4 was fantastic, and it actually gave us some consequences and actual stakes in one of these shows. I feel like it's been a while since I've actually really enjoyed a Disney Plus series, and I'm really happy that Loki Season 2 is not failing us, because Episode 4 again, was fantastic. And we need to start this video off with how the beginning of the episode started, with Renslayer and how OB and Victor Timely are connected. Because when Renslayer was a hunter and part of He Who Remains' army for the Kang War, He Who Remains and Renslayer were at the end of time and talking about building this utopia together and being two rulers. However, when she went back to the TVA, He Who Remains erased her memory. So it looks like after the War of Kangs, he erased everyone's memory. And that's why no one kind of remembers the past. And I'm sure he continuously erased them throughout time. And after Miss Minutes shows her this memory, she turns around and says, well, maybe we don't need him. Maybe we never did. And I feel like this is just her manipulating Renslayer because she does want Kang to be hers. She can use Renslayer to get other people to trust her in order to get what she wants. So I think Miss Minutes is just using Renslayer until the time is up, and then she'll probably just kill her. But I mean, by the end of this episode, Renslayer did get pruned, so maybe she's dead. And then we catch up with Victor Timely, who's just wandering around the halls of the TVA, seeing the different statues and murals that look like him. And I love when Loki tries to get him to trust him, brings him to Obi and Casey. It turns out Obi learned everything from a Victor Timely, and Victor Timely learned everything from Obi. So here we have a loop where which one learned it first? Was it Victor Timely that taught Obi, who taught Victor Timely? Or was it Obi that taught Victor Timely that taught Obi? Honestly, this is where we get into the loop part of things and where it gets really confusing, and also ties into the Ouroboros name, because Ouroboros is a serpent from ancient Egypt and Greece that represented its tail in its mouth, continually devouring itself and being reborn from itself. So just a complete cycle, which is exactly what they point out twice in this episode with Victor Timely and Obi, and then Loki later in the episode, which we'll talk about when we get to it. But the whole plan is to save the Loom. They have a device they can create to put in the Loom to make it so it gets bigger and lets the other branches go through. But of course, there's one big danger of more temporal radiation, and I love how Mobius turns around and is like, I guess Loki is really going to have to hoof it then. Pretty much saying that he's not going back in there and it's Loki's turn, which I thought was a funny moment. And again, it kind of ties into Mobius's kind of funny moments with Loki this season, with just little quips here and there. And it works with the scenes because their dynamic is comedic but also serious at times. However, the team has to let Obi and Victor turn around and try to build this device to make sure the branches can flow properly. So everyone else kind of has to step back for a moment. And I thought it was really interesting that Sylvie was calling out Mobius for wanting to go get pie. It seems like he doesn't care a few people disappear. He doesn't care about where his timeline came from. He's just kind of sitting back and not really in this rush to save these people's lives, because if the timelines get destroyed, that's millions and billions of people that are dead. And I thought it was interesting because it points out something that happened a couple episodes ago as well, with Loki trying to ask Mobius why he doesn't look into his timeline, like where he came from, because he's a variant. Because Sylvie doesn't know this, I think if she does learn what he talked to Loki about, it'll kind of open her idea a little bit more. Because the reason Mobius is not going back to look at his timeline, because he realizes, well, what if I lost something good? If something bad, who cares? But if he lost out on living this really good life, that's gonna hurt. And I thought it was interesting that Loki pointed out that Sylvie couldn't kill Victor Timely, showing that she was kind of having a little bit of hope that this guy could also help them. But she points out that he looked weak. He was begging for his life. She couldn't kill him at that point in time. He wasn't this big menacing threat that Kang really is. But also, by her doing that, it made it so that all these timelines had a chance to live, because the TVA wasn't gonna explode, possibly killing them all. And it was cool to get another MCU reference here, where Loki talks about Thor being banished from Asgard, going to Earth and coming back different, and he thought it was weakness, but showing that it's not weakness. He came back stronger. He came back a better person, kind of like how Sylvie not killing Victor Timely is doing the same for her. And they get into this really big argument where she argues that the TVA is bad. Doc's killed a bunch of people, but Loki snaps back and is like, well, his team has been saving people. They're trying to give hope. They're trying to actually do good. But Sylvie just wants to burn everything to the ground, but it's not always the answer. It's easy to burn stuff to the ground, but hope is hard, which makes sense. You could burn everything to the ground, but if you do that, you have to start from ground zero. However, if you want to have hope and try to fix everything, it's going to take a lot more. It's going to take a lot more out of you as well. And I like how they're showing that where Sylvie's kind of a learning, and I feel like she has a lot to go for this season as well, because she's stuck in her way, but Loki's trying to do better. He's trying to be a good person, and I think he's trying to bring Sylvie with him. Which in the end, Loki does want to protect the timelines, and I feel like maybe he might be the new ruler of the TVA when we finish the series. And one of my favorite moments from that argument is Sylvie turning around and be like, we shouldn't be playing gods. And Loki's like, we are gods. And it's funny because Loki and Sylvie are the trickster gods, because that's what they are in Norse mythology. But holy shit, did this episode take a very dark turn, because it looked like it was going somewhere nice. B-15 is trying to get Dox and the other hunters to join their side of the TVA. She's trying to convince them that they are still trying to save the TVA and be that overarching kind of police to protect the timelines, but just in a different way. However, you have Brad trying to convince them not to do that, and then Renslayer and Miss Minutes coming in to recruit them. Everyone but Brad says, yeah, I'm not joining you, and so they kill them all in the most horrific way possible by making that cube that Loki scared Brad with a couple episodes ago shrink and squish them all to death. So Miss Minute is one hell of a bad guy, and she is absolutely crazy. And now the thing is here is that Brad looked like he was terrified, and I think something in him snapped in that moment when he watched all the people that were kind of his friends get killed in front of him. And then Brad is used to steal Victor Timely by pruning one of his friends, and he even feels bad about it, and takes Victor Timely to Miss Minutes and Renslayer. And the funny part is with this section of the episode too, with everything going on with the TVA, all this future tech, Victor Timely is not shocked by it until he sees a hot cocoa machine, and that's what he's surprised by. It's like a nice little wholesome moment before he gets taken. And then Miss Minutes has also stopped all the temp pads from working, so no one can leave the TVA or move around, which is just another big threat happening. This is where it all comes full circle, because as the Loom is starting to be destroyed and everything's going to chaos, we see Sylvie go into an elevator. And as soon as she went to the elevator, I'm like, wait a second, this is just like her coming out of the elevator in episode 1 where Loki got pruned. In episode 1, I thought Loki pruned himself. I didn't realize he didn't have the pruning stick on him. But then in this, it came full circle because Loki was the one who pruned himself, but it was future Loki pruning past Loki, sending him to the timeline, realizing in that moment is that this is what happened to him. So when Sylvie was coming out of the elevator and Loki got pruned, it was Loki who pruned him. So now we've come full circle from episode 1 and are back to where the TVA is getting destroyed, which again ties into Ouroboros, the serpent devouring itself and being reborn, which I thought that was really interesting. We got 2 instances in this episode kind of showing that. And I like how this led into a funny moment too, because to stop Miss Minutes from taking control of the TVA, they just have to reboot the system and turn off all the safety protocols. And Obi's like,
the dampeners that prevent people from using magic at the TVA. We would have to turn that off too.
Turn it off!
Because both of them have magic and they could actually use their powers to stop the bad guys, which they did, because it was actually pretty easy to take down Renslayer once they had their magic, because they just used Brad and mind controlled him to prune her. And it looks like Renslayer is now dead. It looks like a few people died this episode, because then when Victor chooses to be the one to put the device in, because if something goes wrong, he can fix it, as soon as he opens into it, he instantly dies and he turns into spaghetti like Reed Richards, which I thought was absolutely insane because I didn't see that coming. So we had so much death this episode. We had all the hunters, we had Renslayer, we had the other hunter that Brad killed, we had Victor Timely himself, and then it looks like everyone else dies because the Loom explodes and they're all standing there horrified. But with that ending and the absolute shocker that came from it, I actually have a bunch of theories about what might actually be going on because of this. Like the first one I did talk about in the beginning is Renslayer being manipulated by Miss Minutes. Miss Minutes is going to eventually betray her and take over the TVA and get a body for herself. Like she's not really caring about Renslayer, but now the fact that Renslayer has been pruned, maybe she either went to where everyone goes when they get pruned, or she's actually dead. So that theory might not come to life, but I feel like it's still a possibility. Then we have Victor Timely not being dead. He might have been spaghettified during this, but what if he just got sent to either the end of time or to another point in time where he's solely going to become He Who Remains, and he's starting to become that more evil person rather than being the good-hearted person he was, because they had so much time loop stuff in this episode. What if the whole point of Victor Timely getting saved by Loki, being brought to the TVA, was to become He Who Remains? And then when everyone gets killed at the very end there, I have a feeling they just got scattered through time, either through their original timelines or just randomly, and they'll have to find a way back to each other to possibly stop Miss Minutes from taking over and destroying a bunch of timelines. Because at this point as well, I think this is where the real multiverse was born. The Loom wasn't needed. As soon as the branch timelines overloaded the Loom, it shot out the multiverse, and now the multiverse exists, and this is where we come back to like Multiverse of Madness and other projects where we see the other multiverse projects. But easily, this was the best episode of the season so far. Like, it was so well. The Loom exploding was something I didn't see coming, and all the death that happened, I didn't see either. And I like that it wasn't something that the heroes just fixed. So the heroes weren't able to fix the Loom in the end, and it exploded, possibly making the MCU multiverse. But let me know, what did you think of this episode, and do you have any theories to go along with all the stuff that happened during it? And did you see any Easter eggs or references that I might have missed? Because I am very intrigued by it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit the like button and the subscribe button to stay up to date with all my Marvel and DC videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next week when we figure out what the hell is going on in Loki Season 2.